Good morning, church.
Good morning.
It's nice to see so many of you here today. You know, last week it was just hey, but you know, a lot more today. So this is good. This is good. We're getting closer and closer to fall. People are coming back, and we're seeing more people around. It's great. Let's pray. Father, as we quiet our hearts, as we get ready to hear from you, Lord, and echoing the song, we just want you to have your way, Lord. It's all about you. It's all about your voice and you speaking to us. So, Father God, I ask, Lord, that through whatever words, whatever scriptures, whatever we talk about today, God, that'll draw us closer to you. We'll feel your presence, Lord, that we will learn from you, that our hearts will be touched and our minds invigorated. Lord God, open your word. Open your spirit to us. May we grow. In Christ's name. You know, one of the joys of speaking to a congregation like this is because it is so multinational. We come from all different groups, all different cultures, all different backgrounds. And I sometimes think to myself, you know, what if God had called me just to speak in your average, normal American church? And God would have to give me a lot of grace. Because I don't feel comfortable really in that environment. I feel comfortable in an international environment. And this provides that. But one of the things I discover about internationals is sometimes we tend to identify where we are rather than what our passport says. For instance, as I look at some of the confusion, like, what are you talking about? My children, my son Dane in particular, for instance, would always say that he was African. Okay, well, now if you look at him, you know, he could be from South, you know, Africa's a multinational, you know, multi-ethnic place, you know, there are blacks, whites, etc. And you would say, okay, really? Well, where are you from, South Africa or whatever? But he would claim to be African because his heart is there, his identity is there. He spent his growing up years there. I mean, from the age of 3 until he was in high school, he was there. And so his identity in many ways is there. A lot of people come here and they spend a lot of time and they say, well, yeah, I'm an American now, without that really being reflected on their passport. Or people get so into Chinese culture. You know, I eat Chinese food, I'm learning to speak Chinese, and everything. I'm Chinese. You know, and yeah, you're not. You're not Chinese, even though you have an affinity toward that. The thing is we can have these ideas, these likes, these preferences, etc., these associations, but we don't necessarily have the citizenship. The citizenship is really what truly defines us as that, whether it be Chinese or whether it be American or whatever. It's not just idea or association or preference. The same applies to being a Christian. It's not just an association. It's not just, well, my parents are Christians and I was raised in a Christian home, I'm Christian. Or all of my friends come to RJ and I come to RJ, therefore they're Christian, so I must be Christian. Or, you know, I live in a country that says it's a Christian country, and I've heard this, and you probably have too, well, I'm an American, therefore I'm a Christian. You know, of course I'm a Christian. No. That's association, but not necessarily relationship. Because that's what Christianity is all about. It's about a relationship. your relationship with God, your relationship with Jesus Christ. That is what qualifies you as a Christian, not association. But that relationship needs to be a living relationship, one that is defined by life. And how do we define life? Well, let me give you an example from the dictionary. It says, life is the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, like rocks, right? Including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. Those four things really encapsulate what it means to be alive. You know, as one of the most exciting times, I think, in the life of the church is what we're going through right now. And that is the confirmation that we're seeing. Now, on Wednesday night, we had a record number of people at Wednesday night prayer meeting because we had all the people going through confirmation class. And they were all there, and many of you here were there, and they're there, and we're listening, we're talking, and we're praying together, and all of that, and some great questions were being asked. But what is confirmation? What is confirmation? Confirmation is basically a step in the journey. It is when usually young people come in front of the church and they say, this is what I believe. This is who I am. Not just I come to RJ, not just I was raised in this church. This is me. This is me. And this is my faith. And this is my belief in Jesus Christ. And this is where I'm going forward from. Now that, I don't know, to me that gives me goosebumps. That is exciting. That is alive. That is a living faith. A first step, yeah, but a living faith. Do you have a living faith? Is Jesus Christ your Savior, your Lord? Or is He just an association? Is He just a name? Is God just something that we talk about when we come here? Or is He an active part of your life? Our memory verse today is James 2:18. It says, but someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. It's a very familiar verse to us. But the reason I chose it is because oftentimes we miss out on the concept of that activeness. That faith and deeds go hand in hand. That it's a living faith, it's an active faith. It's a growing faith. It's a reproducing faith. That's what true faith is. It's a belief that springs into something else because it's alive. It's not dead. For believers, what does that look like specifically? Well, let's look back at our definition of life. We talked about life is growth, right? How do you grow as a Christian? How do you grow as a believer? Through prayer, through Bible study, through meditation on God's Word, through memorization, through pulling that inside of yourself, through spending time with God, to learning to depend on God, to not try to do things all on your own, but to really ask, Lord, what do you want from me in this moment? Lord, open a door for me so that I can share it. Lord, what do you want me to do today? Lord, good morning. Not good morning, Lord. You know? But Lord, good morning. As you develop that, as you begin to live that way, you begin to grow closer and closer to this person that you claim you belong to. Reproduction. What is that about with a Christian that's making disciples? Which is what we're told to do, right? Go ye therefore in all the world and making disciples of all nations. What does that involve? That means, and we talked about it before in here, that means living your faith out loud. Really living it in the way your lifestyle, your words, your actions. It also means sometimes going to your neighbor or your friend or your colleague and doing a checkup with them. Talking to them about Jesus. Ooh, the J word. You know? Being willing to put yourself out there to witness to others. And I know it's hard. Boy, I know it's hard. I always like St. Francis of Assisi's ideas about that. You know, he said, talking about going out and witnessing in the world, and he said sometimes use words. Basically, you preach the word through your actions, through your lifestyle. But occasionally we do have to use words. We do have to tell people about Jesus. And then once they come to Christ, once they understand that, once they make that decision for themselves, then our job's not done. Our job is also to come alongside and mentor, to help those people grow in God. Like a little brother or a little sister. That's our job. That is how we reproduce. That is how our faith, another aspect of our faith being living, being alive, producing fruit. Third thing is what is called the functional activity. Well, that sounds like functional activity. What does that mean? How about we look at it this way? Taking action. Taking action. And that can mean basically the do's and the don'ts of Christianity. What do you do? What do you don't do? A wise person once said, if you concentrate more on the do's, you won't have time for the don'ts. In other words, if you're really doing everything that you should be doing as a Christian, all of those things that you're not really supposed to be doing, you won't have time for them anyway. Because you're really focusing on living for God. We get in trouble when we have too much time on our hands. When we take our eyes off God and eyes off Jesus, and we instead decide to do things our own way, that's when we get into trouble. That's when things fall apart. But when we're really living for God, when we're really trying to be all He has asked us to be and called us to be, then our lives are dramatically different. And continual change. Continual change means adapting in service and ministry as we age and as the Spirit leads. You know, if I was younger and somehow more in shape, I mean, I have a shape, but it's not the right shape. The shape maybe I had once upon a time. You know, I could maybe take a bunch of the youth, like I did when I was at the Car Academy in Senegal, or when I was at Ivory Coast in the school there. And I taught the martial arts. I would take some of the young people and we would do self-defense, and I would get involved in their lives, and I would talk about, how this could be, your own way, your own path. I called it Jibundo from the Japanese, and I would say, this is your own way, this is your own path, using the skills and the strengths that God gave you. And I could work out with them. You know what? I think I would have a hard time right now going and battling and doing all those different kinds of things right now. I'm too fat. I'm too old. And so ministry changes. Ministry changes. Our service changes. We adapt as the Spirit leads. Those four aspects, growth, reproduction, functional activity, continual change, are all part of the Christian life. All part of a living faith. And if you look at your life and you say, well, Pastor, I don't have those, then you need to do a check. You need to look at what's going on. Is your faith truly alive? But the reality of a life lived for Christ is that it will cause in our world a reaction. If you live, if you are alive, it will cause a reaction. Because for every action in life, there's a reaction, right? That's a law. And the fact is that an active Christian faith makes waves. An active Christian faith makes waves. Now, I have to ask you a very personal question here. You ready? Personal question. Are you a shower person or are you a bath person? Shower. How many of you are shower people? Okay, how many of you are bath people? Oh, come on. Yeah, I got a couple of brave people out there, are bath people. You like baths better than showers. Oh, yeah, we enjoy it. Well, and I know all of you have had baths, or I assume so, once upon a time. But when you have a bath, what do? You turn on the water, you get the nice, maybe bubble bath or whatever you've got, you get it all nice and ready. You're alone, hopefully. Except, of course, for your rubber ducky. You got your little rubber ducky or your little rubber frog or whatever. We'll say your little rubber ducky. Oh, come on. I know some of you have rubber duckies. And you take your rubber ducky and you put the rubber ducky in the water, and then you put your toe in. And you notice when you put your toe in the water, what happens? Rubber ducky goes. Right? And then you slide in, the rest of you, rocking back and forth, and then you kind of settle down, and the ducky does his, kind of little sort of like this. But every time you move, you grab the soap, you do whatever, the ducky goes splash, 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 right? Because you're moving. And every time we have action, there is reaction. Now, if you were to do a cannonball into the bath, wow, there would be a big reaction, right? Absolutely, the water would be going everywhere. Always a reaction to what you do. Ships do the same thing. Ships are sailing on the ocean as the wind moves, gets into those sails, and the ships go. They cause displacement of the water. They cause waves. We were out at a dolphin tour in Galveston Bay just a couple of weeks ago. We were out there and was watching the dolphins, and occasionally one of these speedboats would go by. And our boat would go burr, 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 because of the fact that they were causing so many waves as they were going by. But if the sails are furled and the engine stops, the boat just sits in the water and the waves rock it, and it doesn't rock anything. And eventually, if that boat sinks, it goes down, it gets covered by water, and what happens to it? It just decays. It just rots. It just rusts. And that can happen to your faith. If your faith is not living, if your faith is not active, if it is not moving, the waves, rather than you causing waves, the world will consume it. And you will sink to the bottom, and you will rot, and you'll decay. Same thing with dust. An immovable object, if we were to take this pulpit and never use it and just sit it here, and it was just a piece of decoration, never clean it, whatever, the dust would come down, mold would get on it, and all that comes. It's just part of life. Now, let's pretend for a second, though, that this pulpit right here, which we just take for granted, let's say that it was alive. And it began to grow. And it began to produce little pulpits. and begin to move about and function and to change, etc., you know what would happen? You never react to this pulpit, but if that happened, every single one of us, me included, would run out of this room screaming like little girls, wouldn't we? Exactly! You can't have that happen. It would cause a reaction. Your faith needs to cause a reaction in this world. Because that's what it's for. It's not designed to just be something that you sit on a shelf and that people come by and they don't really notice it. It needs to be loud. It needs to be active. It needs to be living. That's what you were called to. But an active, living faith will always result in a reaction from the community around us. And we see this happening in Ephesus in Acts 19, 23 through 27. It says, about that time there arose a great disturbance about the way. A silversmith named Demetrius, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought in a lot of business for the craftsmen there. He called them together along with the workers from related trades and said, you know, my friends, that we receive a good income from this business. And you see and hear how this fellow Paul has convinced and led astray large numbers of people here in Ephesus and in practically the whole province of Asia. He says that gods made by human hands are no gods at all. There's danger not only that our trade will lose its good name, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be discredited, and the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the province of Asia and the world, will be robbed of her divine majesty. Okay. Now, cultural notes on that. The way early Christians, to be called Christian in the early days was a major insult. It was a point of ridicule. Just like here in the United States, sometimes we adopted the term Yankee, but it used to be an insult. A Yankee Doodle Dandy, the song and everything, it was an insult. But we eventually adopted it and embraced it. Early Christians did not always adopt the term Christian. Instead, they called their movement the Way. And that's what we're talking about, the people of the Way. And also in Ephesus, you see this temple that they're talking about, this temple of Artemis, this goddess. This was actually one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was 4 times, almost 4 times as large as the temple to Athena in Athens. Okay, their namesake. It was huge. And it was considered a wonderful thing. And Demetrius has some real concerns. Demetrius is like, look, we make our living this way. You and all of us, I mean, we do this. I don't know if he was really a true worshiper of Artemis or not. Because he's not really talking about that so much. It's more like, look, this is what's going to happen. We're going to lose our income. And yeah, Artemis is going to be, put to the shelf too. It was a real concern. And in fact, in the 2nd century, the governor of Bithynia said the same thing. He was like, you know what? As these Christians rise up, as they become more and more involved in society, the temples and the sacrifices are starting to diminish. It's a real concern. It was an economic concern. And so, yeah, these people are concerned. But see, that just emphasizes this, that a living, active faith, your living, active faith, is a threat to the world around you. Is a threat to this community. Edmond, Oklahoma. If you practice a living, active faith, you are a threat here. It's a good thing, but it's still a threat. It's a threat to the world. It's a threat because, it threatens the worldview of society. Our society is pretty much atheistic. Really is. Our society may say this God, that God, everything. But basically, there's a whole subset that says, well, it doesn't really matter what you believe. You can believe in the giant spaghetti monster if you want to. It doesn't really matter. Basically, it's atheistic. Basically, it says, really, there really is no God. Belief just kind of helps people get through life. It's also very humanistic. If there is a God, guess who it is? It must be us. It must be us. We're building up our potential. We're getting better because we're basically good. And all of this kind of stuff. In Christianity, man, that's a major threat to that worldview. Second thing is, Christianity threatens the accepted ethics and morality of society. The current ethics and morality of society is like, hey, if it feels good, do it, right? And it's all about me anyway. And so if I happen to be having a child that I don't want to have a child, then I'll go someplace to get rid of it. Because it's not about the child, it's about me. Or, I'm engaging in a lifestyle that is not God-honoring, that the Bible specifically preaches against, but that's okay because it's all about me. All about my desires, what I want. Moral becomes relative. Morality does. And so Christianity, with its code of behavior, threatens that. And it's an economic threat because as people come to Christ, as more and more people believe and are truly active in their faith, historically we see that in communities where Christianity is on the rise, the bars close. Drug use goes down. All of those negative things in society diminish because we have an active faith that threatens the world around us. A living faith shines Jesus' light into the darkness, and it reveals all the shameful secrets and the depravity. And so, the world's opposition creates a backsplash. Now, before I continue with this, I must say that there are going to be people here, especially my wife, who are going to say, backsplash? What do you mean by backsplash? That is the thing that you put in a shower or behind a kitchen tube, the water goes, and that's the backsplash. Okay? And that is usually the common use of it. Okay? However, there is a dictionary definition that I found that says that a backsplash is also the splashing that occurs whenever water is displaced through rowing, etc., etc. All right? Probably a better term would have been backwash. But quite frankly, backwash is disturbing to us, isn't it? It brings to mind images of you loan somebody your water bottle and they backwash in it, so that, Or backlash really doesn't have the water idea. So I used backsplash, just deal with it, okay? Backsplash, though, backwash, backlash, they're common in life. Because when the waves of whatever, when everything is disturbed, the waves crash against something, another object, bam, it just comes back. You can't avoid it. And the wave was making waves in Ephesus. And when they hit the wall of worldly opposition, there was a violent reaction. There was a backsplash against them. Acts 19, 28 through 34. When they heard this, they were furious and began shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" Soon the whole city was in an uproar. The people seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia, and all of them rushed into the theater together. Paul wanted to appear before the crowd, but the disciples would not let him. Even some of the officials of the province, friends of Paul, sent him a message begging him not to venture into the theater. The assembly was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people did not even know why they were there. The Jews in the crowd pushed Alexander to the front, and they shouted instructions to him. He motioned for silence in order to make a defense before the people. But when they realized he was a Jew, they all shouted in unison for about 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" Wow. Crazy, huh? A riot, mob rule. Living your faith out loud, even here in Edmond, will cause a reaction. You may not have mob rule, but you may be called intolerant. You may be called a bigot. You may be called, you're a religious nut. You're a fanatic. You may lose friends. You may lose opportunities. People may treat you with kid gloves and not invite you to their parties or different things like that because you have an active living faith. You know what? Jesus is worth it. Jesus is worth it. Almost any person here who has had a living active faith, who has walked with Jesus, can tell you they've lost friends. They've lost opportunities. Jesus is worth it. Because quite frankly, this time we're here on earth, it's like that. But Jesus is for eternity. And despite how rough things become for us, God may use unique ways to calm the waters. God may use unique ways to calm the waters. In our journey through the book of Acts, we've seen a variety of ways that God has stepped in and gotten his people out of trouble, haven't we? Time and time again, he has moved in a way to get them out, to calm the waters. And here in Ephesus, no exception. Look in Acts 19, 35 through 41. The city clerk. Now, the city clerk, by the way, in Ephesus is not just some little functionary. This was kind of like the governor, the man in charge, the mayor. Okay? The city clerk quieted the crowd and said, "Fellow Ephesians, doesn't all the world know that the city of Ephesus is the guardian of the temple of the great Artemis and of her image which fell from heaven? Therefore, since these facts are undeniable, you ought to calm down and not do anything rash. You have brought these men here, though they have neither robbed temples nor blasphemed our goddess. If then Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a grievance against anybody, the courts are open. There are proconsuls. They can press charges. If there's anything further you want to bring up, it must be settled in a legal assembly. As it is, we're in danger of being charged with rioting because of what happened today. And this was a big concern because they're answerable to Rome. And Rome wants peace in their provinces. In that case, we would not be able to account for this commotion since there is no reason for it." After he had said this, he dismissed the assembly. Once again, God steps in and calms the waves. He does it in a kind of a strange, unique way of doing it through a non-Christian to come in and restore calm. When we choose to live for God, to truly follow Jesus, we will find ourselves at times in the storm, in rough seas, rough waters. But you remember in the Bible, Jesus is asleep in the boat, the disciples are out in the boat on the sea, and all of a sudden the storm comes up, right? The winds rise up, the waves are rocking, and the disciples are terrified. They think, "Wait, Jesus, Master, wake up. Aren't you even concerned that we're going to drown?" Jesus calmly gets up and calms the winds and the waves. Wow. You say, "Well, that's unique. That just happened." The thing is that if you really think about it, it may be not as dramatic as that. But Jesus is always calming the storms. God is always helping us through and smoothing out the waters. But time and time again in our lives, when things look like they're just crashing down on us, God stepped in, smoothed it. Ordinary miracles that we sometimes ignore. That's the way God does with His people. Why does God care? Why does God care about me? Why calm the waters? Because God has His hand on His people. God has His hand on His people. And the key word here is His. His people. When we believe in Him and we accept the gift of life from His Son, we are adopted into the kingdom of God. We become His children. We become His. And some of you have heard the song. We sung it in church before by Casting Crowns, Who Am I? But you may not be as familiar with the lyrics. I just want to go through them really quickly with us, because it's one of the most beautiful songs, and it speaks to this right here. John Mark Hall of Casting Crowns wrote this, and he says, "Who am I that the Lord of all the earth would care to know my name, would care to feel my hurt? Who am I that the bright and morning star would choose to light the way for my ever-wandering heart? Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I'm a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow. A wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still, you hear me when I'm calling. Lord, you catch me when I'm falling, and you've told me who I am. I am yours. Who am I that the eyes that see my sin would look on me with love and watch me rise again? Who am I that the voice that calmed the sea would call out through the rain and calm the storm in me? Whom shall I fear? I'm yours." Those are powerful lyrics that really tell us about the relationship we have as believers with Jesus Christ, or that we should have, as long as our faith is living and not merely association. Saul of Tarsus, in his misguided service, had been God's enemy. But now as Paul, he was reborn as his child, and God's hand was obviously on him. Our last verse, Acts 21. When the uproar had ended, Paul sent for the disciples, and after encouraging them, said goodbye and set out for Macedonia. Paul, the uproar has ended, and God's putting him someplace else. God has His hand on him. God is moving him yet again to someplace else of service. God preserved Paul and set him out again to make even more waves by living his faith out loud. So my question for us today is our faith making waves? Is your faith making waves? In your school? In your job? Among your friends? Among your family? Or is it just like a ship at the bottom of the ocean? It's rusting and decaying. What's your faith like? We've been called to a living, active faith. We're born to grow, to reproduce, to take action, to change, to live. Don't miss it. Don't miss what you've been called to be. Pastor.
Thanks, Todd, for Pastor John sharing the gospel.